This last night of Jesus's earthly life was awful in every way. Uh, we're in Matthew 26, verse 69. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. And he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. Pause, because I wonder what the oath was. Don't know. Verse 73, after a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away, like mine does, and my wife's. We're from Oklahoma. 47 or 74. Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know the man. Do you? Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Well, yeah. I don't know that any of us could truly say, oh, I wouldn't have done that. You know, if you're positive, then I kind of envy you. Long years ago, I mean, before I was married, I've been married for 50 years, so maybe 51 or 2 years ago, I heard a talk in Terre Haute, Indiana, and the only thing I remember about the talk was that this point was made. And I don't remember who the speaker was, but they were using this episode of Jesus' biography as their text. And what he said was, Peter was willing to die for Jesus, but he had some trouble living for him. Yeah. I think Peter meant it when he said, I'll die before I disown you. I mean, that was a pretty emotional statement, emotional driven anyway. It would be wrong for me to criticize Peter for his spinelessness, because it's not been that dramatic, but I think most Christians at some point have backed away from their solid emotional commitment to Jesus. Well, okay. What I don't want to do is lay a bunch more guilt on a whole bunch of people, which that'll never happen in this setting because a whole bunch of people don't even watch. But I do think we got to confront it in ourselves. There's probably more of Simon Peter in us than we want or even realize. Peter, the rest of what happened in this kangaroo court, Peter's not included in it. When the rooster crowed, he left the courtyard and wept bitterly. Well, yeah. Okay. Excuse me. Matthew 27. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. They were getting what they wanted. They just didn't have the details tweaked. Verse 2, so they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. We're going to see in a few verses, more than a few, but later. The Jews didn't have a right to execute anybody. Only Rome had that right. And so they handed him over to Pilate the governor. He did have, it was within his authority to have a person executed. So this was early in the morning. Jesus had been taken prisoner at night. We don't know how late, but it was nighttime. Now, early in the morning, not the wee hours of, 3 or 4 in the morning, but at daybreak, they bound up Jesus again and they led him to Pilate. Verse 3, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I've sinned, he said, for I've betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us, they said. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. The rooster crows. He leaves the courtyard, weeps bitterly. Judas realizes that they were condemning Jesus to death, and in his remorse, he brings the money back to the Jewish leaders and says, "Here, I have." Look at his words. I've betrayed innocent blood. He knew what he had done. He throws the money. I mean, their response to him was, well, I don't mean anything to us. That's your problem. Ooh. See, that's kind of what Satan's plan always involves, is that it's your problem now. It's not, doesn't mean anything to us. Okay. Judas threw the money back into the temple, and he went out and he hung himself. He committed suicide. His remorse was so deep and overwhelming that he believed it was better for him to die than to live on with this remorse. Judas was not a great guy. John tells us that he was actually a thief. He was a keeper of the funds for Jesus and the disciples, and he often dipped into the funds for his own benefit. He was a sleazebag. He, betrayed Jesus for a price. It's not like he believed this cause that Jesus needed to be eliminated because he believed in the Jewish leaders' cause. He was doing it for the money. He was just a thug. Well, no, that's not fair. But it kind of is. I've mentioned to you, I'm not sure what to do with Judas. I think it was on the result of his own free will that he betrayed Jesus in this way. I don't think God made him do it. I think God allowed him to do it. Judas didn't know how to deal with consequences of what he had done. I don't think any of us have betrayed Jesus in that way. I'm not sure I know how we could. But all of us have been disloyal to him at one time or another. And I think you could even make a case that when I sin, that's an action of disloyalty. and so in that respect, I suppose we're a little like Judas. But here's the big difference. Judas didn't know how to deal with the consequences of what he had done. He saw no hope. For us, because of Jesus' willing death, there are consequences to our sin. But our sin itself can be forgiven. I think I probably told this at some point before in the So Care of Stevie boy thing. I remember Ed Strong telling me, well, he didn't just tell me, it was a story he told in my hearing about a time when he was 10 or 11 years old, and his dad, Edwin Strong, who, if you're familiar with Ozark Christian College, was one of the first presidents of Ozark Christian College, called him in and said, Ed, I want you to go get a handful of nails and a hammer and the board over in the garage. He did, brought it back, and then his dad said, I want you to nail all those nails into the board. And what 10 or 11-year-old boy would have been fun? Of course. Bang, bang, banged away, and he nailed them all in. And then he held up the board, and Edwin said, his dad said, now I want you to take out all those nails. I just nailed them in. We'll take them out. So he pulled all the nails out, and then his dad said, Ed, the nails, they represent sin in our lives. And when we sin, it's like that nail got pounded into the board. But God forgives us of sin, and that's what your pulling the nails out of the board was. It was like how God forgives us. But now look at the board. There's still marks, and pretty ugly marks, where the nails were pulled out. Ed, that's what happens sometimes with our sin. It leaves a mark. There are consequences for our choices. And when we choose to sin, God may not remove the consequences of those sins. They may be like the nail marks in that board. The sin is forgiven, but the consequence remains. As an old guy, I look at the world, and one of the things I see is there is not very much regard for consequences. I don't know who to blame, and whoever I would blame, it makes no difference. The fact is, there are consequences to our choices. And as followers of Jesus, our goal is to never sin, but we're going to sin. And there is forgiveness for that. Book of 1 John is great reference for that conflict. But there are consequences For us, even when sin leaves a mark, there is the hope, the secure hope and knowledge that Jesus has paid the price to forgive our sin. And he will give us whatever we need to cope with the consequences. Well, that's enough for today. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.